It doesn't give you jokes. It doesn't give you bedtime stories. It doesn't even give you a smooth, easy escape. That's the tiny flaw. This book won't tuck you in. It won't entertain you the way a streaming show does. But what it does give you, it gives you the keys to your own mind. Every single day, you make choices you can't explain. You hesitate when you should act. You gamble when you should walk away. You trust confidence, even when it's hollow. And then you wonder, why? This book pulls back the curtain. It shows the machinery humming behind your eyes. It reveals how fast thinking tricks you, and how slow thinking often arrives too late. It doesn't fix your evenings. It fixes your life. Imagine never falling for the salesman's anchor price. Imagine seeing through headlines designed to terrify you. Imagine catching your brain in the act before it pushes you into a trap you'll regret. That's the power hiding here. Not comfort, not entertainment, clarity. Skip it, and you'll live in the same fog, making the same mistakes, telling yourself the same lies. Keep watching, and you step into the detective's role. You finally get to interrogate your own mind and rewrite the story it's been feeding you. The book doesn't make you laugh. It makes you wake up. Imagine you glance at a photo of a woman's face. Without effort, without asking, your mind instantly tells you she's angry. You don't calculate it. You don't pause. You don't weigh probabilities. It just arrives like a push notification in your brain. That's one character in our story, the fast automatic system. Now, let's switch scenes. Someone hands you a multiplication problem, 17 times 24. Different feeling, right? Suddenly there's effort. You need paper, or at least mental space. You lean in, focus, wrestle with the numbers. That's the other character, the slow, deliberate system. So here's the mystery. Why do we have these two very different ways of thinking, and how do they coexist inside one skull? To make sense of it, Kahneman gives them names, not glamorous ones, more like placeholder nicknames. System 1, the fast operator. System 2, the slow thinker. And the plot of this whole book is really about how these two dance, argue, and sometimes trip each other up. System 1 is quick on its feet. It's the part of you that recognizes your friend's voice in a noisy room, that fills in the phrase bread and, without hesitation, that recoils at a disgusting image before you even think. It's automatic. You can't switch it off any more than you can stop yourself from knowing that 2 + 2 = 4. System 2, on the other hand, is like the deliberate accountant of the mind. It takes effort. When you park in a narrow spot, keep track of arguments in a debate, or solve a logic problem, that's System 2 burning energy. And you can feel it. Your pupils dilate. Your pulse quickens. It's work. It's the part of you that sighs when you're forced to do taxes. The trouble is, System 2 is a bit lazy. It doesn't step in unless it has to. Most of the time, it just rubber stamps what System 1 feeds it. If System 1 says, "That guy looks suspicious," System 2 usually goes along. Only when things get difficult or surprising does System 2 rouse itself. Like when a gorilla walks across a basketball game. Half of us miss it because our attention is swallowed elsewhere. But if we do notice, it's System 2 snapping awake, demanding, "Wait, what just happened?" Think of them as two detectives on a case. System 1 is the impulsive one, always blurting out theories, sometimes brilliant, sometimes dead wrong. System 2 is the careful partner, slower, less enthusiastic, but able to check the facts when it's really needed. Together, they make a powerful team. Alone, each is flawed. Here's the twist. System 1 is the real star of the show. It shapes far more of our judgments and actions than we realize. System 2 likes to believe it's in charge, the hero, the decision maker. But more often than not, it's just cleaning up after System 1, rationalizing decisions that were already made in a split second. So two characters share the stage inside your mind. One fast, one slow, one effortless, one effortful. They don't just influence your decisions. They are your decisions. And the mystery deepens as we follow them. How often does the fast one mislead us? And how often does the slow one fail to show up at all? If System 1 is quick and instinctive, then System 2 is the grind, the heavy lifter. And you know when it's working because you feel it in your body. Your pupils widen, your shoulders tense, your heart ticks faster. Thinking hard is real labor. Here's a test. Try adding 1 to each digit of a random number, like turning 5,294 into 6,305, and do it in rhythm with a ticking beat. After a few seconds, your head starts buzzing. That's System 2, straining like someone jogging uphill. And here's the odd thing, your pupils would literally tell on you. They expand when your brain is under strain, like a tiny flashlight revealing the effort inside. System 2 has a clear weakness. It's lazy. It hates to work harder than it has to. Left alone, it prefers a gentle stroll through mental life, saving energy. So it only kicks in the high gear when System 1 runs into trouble, when the automatic guess isn't enough. It's the backup generator, not the main engine. But because System 2 is effortful, it comes with strict limits. You only have so much mental fuel to spend at once. Try doing 2 demanding tasks simultaneously, say, multiplying numbers while making a tricky left turn in traffic, and you'll crash. Attention is a scarce budget. Spend it carelessly, and something important gets missed. That's what makes the famous invisible gorilla experiment so shocking. People focused on counting basketball passes completely failed to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking right through the game. It's not that they're blind, it's that their attention has been swallowed whole. And here's the kicker. They don't believe they could have missed it. We're blind to our blindness. System 2 doesn't just help with logic or math. It also handles self-control. Think of the last time you bit your tongue instead of snapping at someone. Or force yourself to keep reading a boring book, even when your mind wandered. Or fought against a natural instinct to slam the brakes on ice. Those moments were System 2 wrestling System 1 into submission. But here's the tension. We can't live in full System 2 mode. It's exhausting. Life would crawl. Imagine checking every intuition, every reaction, every snap judgment. You'd never leave the house. So the mind strikes a compromise. System 1 runs most of the show, quick and dirty, and System 2 steps in when stakes are high, or when we notice danger, or when a surprise yanks us awake. Think of attention as currency. Every choice, every act of focus costs something. And laziness, the law of least effort, is built into us. We naturally seek the cheapest path. That's efficient, but it leaves us vulnerable. When the gorilla walks across the court, or when a bias sneaks in under the radar, we might not see it. And so, the mystery sharpens. If System 2 is both our strongest weapon and our laziest partner, how often can we trust it to show up before the damage is done? Chapter 3. The Lazy Controller. Now we get to one of the strangest traits of System 2. It's not just slow, it's lazy. And that laziness isn't a glitch. It's a defining feature. Think about your daily choices. If there's a shortcut, your brain takes it. If there's a simple story instead of a complex one, you'll prefer it. If a problem can be answered with intuition instead of logic, you'll lean that way. This isn't because you're weak, it's because the machinery of thought is built to conserve energy. Mental work is expensive, and your brain is stingy with its budget. Here's the catch. Because System 2 doesn't like to spend effort, it often just nods along with whatever System 1 tosses up. A snap judgment arrives. This person looks trustworthy. And instead of checking, System 2 approves the hunch. The danger isn't that System 1 makes guesses. It's that System 2 rarely bothers to intervene. Take a simple example. A bat and ball costs $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Instantly, most people think 10 cents. It feels obvious. It feels right. But it's wrong. If the ball were 10 cents, the bat would be $1.10, making the total $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. Yet even highly educated folks fall for the easy answer because their System 2 didn't bother to check the math. This is the lazy controller in action. System 2 could step in, double-check, correct the mistake. But unless something forces it to, it often won't, and that's why so many of our judgments, even the confident ones, can be riddled with errors. The laziness goes further. System 2 doesn't just skip hard work, it tires quickly. Put someone under mental strain, like memorizing numbers while making decisions, and you'll see their self-control weaken. They're more likely to take risks, more likely to grab unhealthy snacks, more likely to snap at someone. It's as if the mental muscle runs out of glucose, and suddenly the shortcuts of System 1 take over completely. This matters in real life more than we'd like to admit. Think of a judge making parole decisions late in the day, after hours of hearings. Research shows they're far more likely to deny parole, the lazy option, the safe option, simply because they're mentally depleted. Their System 2 can't muster the effort to weigh cases carefully anymore. Here's the haunting truth. Laziness shapes far more of our decisions than we realize. The part of us that thinks it's rational, balanced, in control, that part is often asleep at the wheel. And when it does wake up, it's often too drained to push back. So the detective story sharpens again. If System 1 jumps to conclusions and System 2 is too lazy to intervene, what chance do we have of ever making sound judgments? Imagine tossing a pebble into a pond. Ripples spread outward, touching everything around it. That's how your mind works when one idea enters. It automatically triggers a cascade of other ideas, feelings, and memories. This is the power of association, and System 1 is the machine behind it. Here's how it plays out. Someone says banana. Without effort, your mind flashes yellow, curve, maybe even the taste or the smell. You might think of monkeys or smoothies or that time one went mushy in your bag. You don't choose those connections. They just arrive. That's the associative machine at work, linking everything that fits together. This automatic spreading of ideas is what makes System 1 feel so seamless. You see a face, you sense a mood, and from there your brain predicts what's likely to happen next. If the woman looks angry, you anticipate sharp words. If someone smiles warmly, you expect friendliness. It feels instant, but under the hood, it's a chain of associations firing off at lightning speed. But there's a trap hidden in this. Because the associative machine craves coherence, it weaves stories out of whatever fragments it has. A loud crash must be an accident. A sudden frown? They must be upset with you. The machine doesn't like gaps. It fills them. And in doing so, it often oversimplifies reality. Think of how stereotypes take root. Someone hears meek, tidy, detail-oriented, and immediately the mind shouts, librarian. The resemblance clicks so strongly that the machine ignores the bigger statistical truth, that farmers outnumber male librarians by a huge margin. System 1 loves resemblance. System 2 would have to step in to correct with probabilities. But System 2, as we've seen, is often too lazy to interrupt. This web of associations also explains why mood matters so much in judgment. When you're feeling good, your mind opens the floodgates to positive associations. Everything seems easier, safer, more appealing. When you're anxious or sad, the machine tilts the other way, feeding negative links and darker predictions. The context shifts the whole network. There's a beauty in this system, of course. It's what lets us improvise conversations, get jokes, recognize patterns. It's why a single hint can unlock a memory buried for years. But it's also why we jump to conclusions, fall prey to illusions, and stick to stories that feel consistent even when they're wrong. In short, the associative machine is both our greatest ally and a source of endless bias. It connects dots effortlessly, but sometimes it draws the wrong picture. And here's the chilling part. Once the story feels coherent, we rarely question it. So the detective case deepens. If our minds are busy weaving tailies out of fragments, how do we separate when those tailies are sharp insights versus when they're just convenient fictions? Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease. Sometimes Your mind just feels smooth. Words glide. Ideas click. Everything seems familiar, obvious, comfortable. That sensation is what Kahneman calls cognitive ease, and it's one of the most seductive forces in our mental life. Think of it like walking downhill versus trudging uphill. When things feel easy, System 1 is in its element. It trusts the smoothness, assumes fluency equals truth. That's why a simple statement, repeated often enough, starts to feel true even if it isn't. Propaganda has lived off this for centuries. Repeat a claim until the sheer familiarity of it convinces people. Ease shows up everywhere. A clear font versus a blurry one. A rhyme versus a clunky phrase. A face you've seen before versus a stranger's. Each of these tugs at the same lever. When something is easy to process, you instinctively feel it must be right, safe, familiar. System 1 hums along happily, and System 2 doesn't question it. But here's the problem. Ease is a terrible lie detector. A statement can feel true simply because it's familiar, not because it's accurate. This is why rumors stick. You hear them enough times, and suddenly they ring true. It's also why financial fraudsters love to keep things simple and sleek. Investors trust what looks easy. The reverse is just as revealing. When something feels difficult, like reading in a faint font or solving a tricky puzzle, you become more suspicious, more analytical. System 2 gets activated because the smooth ride has been interrupted. Effort flips a mental switch. You slow down, scrutinize, question. It doesn't mean you're always right, but at least the lazy autopilot is shaken awake. Mood ties in here too. When you're in a good mood, relaxed, at ease, your mind becomes more associative and creative, but also more gullible. You trust the easy answers. When you're tense or wary, you think more carefully, but you're less inventive. It's a trade-off. Comfort fuels creativity but weakens vigilance. Difficulty sharpens focus, but narrows the mind. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. A candidate with a catchy slogan and a confident smile often gets judged more favorably than a rival with clumsy phrasing, even if their ideas are weaker. A product with clean design feels more trustworthy than one that looks messy. Ease biases us long before logic enters. And here's the sinister twist. You can't switch this off. You can learn about it, laugh at it, swear you won't fall for it, but your brain still runs on ease. Familiarity breeds belief. Fluency feels safe. Coherence feels true. The detective story thickens here. If ease guides us so powerfully, then the mystery isn't just why we believe wrong things, but how many of our so-called truths are simply the byproducts of repetition and smoothness. How many of the things you know are real, and how many are just easy? Your brain is always running a silent background program. It's like a watchful security guard, scanning the environment asking, does this fit? Is this normal? You rarely notice it, but it's there, checking events against expectations, comparing reality against the patterns it has stored. Most of the time, things line up. The bus shows up at the stop, the dog barks at a stranger, the cashier hands you change. These events glide by unnoticed because they match the mind's sense of what usually happens. But the moment something violates the pattern, a cat barking, a bus driving onto the sidewalk, the cashier giving you far too much change, your attention jolts awake. Surprise is the alarm bell. System 1, the fast machine, is built around these norms. It constantly predicts what will happen next based on what it already knows. See a frown? Expect harsh words. Hear footsteps running behind you in a dark alley? Expect danger. When reality matches prediction, your mind relaxes. When reality clashes, your mind scrambles for a story. And here's the key. Your brain doesn't just stop at surprise. It rushes to build a cause. If a glass shatters in the kitchen, you instantly imagine someone dropped it. If a friend doesn't text back, you guess they're upset. This automatic hunt for causes is relentless. The mind can't bear randomness, so it stitches meaning into every gap. Sometimes, this works beautifully. Predicting what comes next keeps us alive, helps us understand others, fuels learning. But other times, it leads us astray. We invent explanations for chance events, see patterns where none exist, assign causes to outcomes that were really just luck. Think of superstitions. Wear the lucky socks and your team wins. Skip them and they lose. The mind loves tidy cause and effect stories, even when reality is messier. This bias toward causality also explains why coincidences feel spooky. Meet someone on vacation who grew up in your hometown, and instantly you think, what are the odds? It feels meaningful, though statistically, it's just bound to happen occasionally. But System 1 doesn't think in statistics. It thinks in narratives. The story feels too neat to ignore, so we give it weight. The danger, of course, is that once the mind settles on a cause, it rarely questions it. Surprise jolts us, but explanation soothes us, even if the explanation is flimsy. That's why conspiracy theories can be so sticky. They offer a story that ties unexpected events together, satisfying the craving for order. So here's the detective's clue. Your brain is constantly generating predictions, scanning for violations, and rushing to patch surprises with causes. Most of the time, it works so smoothly you don't notice. But in its eagerness, it often convinces you that the world is more predictable, more explainable than it really is. And that leaves us with the nagging question. If our minds are this desperate for order, how often are we mistaking fiction for fact just to quiet the discomfort of surprise? Your mind loves shortcuts. It doesn't just process the world, it leaps ahead of the evidence, filling in gaps before they're even open. This instinct is so strong that Kahneman calls System 1 a machine for jumping to conclusions. Here's how it works. When a question is hard, your brain often substitutes it with an easier one. You're asked, is this person trustworthy? Instead, your mind answers, does he look like someone I trust? The second question is simpler, more vivid, and System 1 happily supplies an instant answer. The trick is, you don't notice the substitution. You just feel confident you've judged correctly. This is why first impressions are so powerful. A confident speaker feels more persuasive. A smiling stranger feels safer. The snap judgment forms before evidence is even on the table, and System 2, our supposed fact-checker, rarely intervenes. The lazy controller lets the conclusion stand. The mechanism behind this is what psychologists call what you see is all there is. System 1 only works with the information at hand. It doesn't stop to ask, what am I missing? If you're told about someone who is diligent, polite, and orderly, you'll confidently predict success in their career. You won't pause to wonder about other factors like health, family, or luck. The story feels coherent, so it feels complete. And the coherence is addictive. The mind doesn't care much about truth. It cares about a story that hangs together. This is why conspiracy theories, stereotypes, and hunches can feel so compelling. Once System 1 stitches a narrative, it glows with certainty, even if it's built on scraps. Consider a classic experiment. Participants read a description of Linda, a young woman deeply concerned with social justice. When asked whether Linda is more likely to be a bank teller or a bank teller active in the feminist movement, most people choose the second option. It feels right. The details fit. But logically, it can't be more probable for someone to be a bank teller and a feminist than to just be a bank teller. Still, the mind jumps to the more coherent story, ignoring logic. This habit of leaping ahead isn't always bad. It saves time. It helps us navigate daily life without overthinking. But it's risky in situations that demand precision. We draw conclusions on flimsy evidence, cling to them, and often double down when challenged. System 1 thrives on confidence, not accuracy. And confidence itself is deceptive. The smoother a story feels, the more certain we are. This is why flimsy arguments delivered with confidence often persuade, while nuanced, careful explanations can leave people cold. Ease, coherence, and confidence align, and truth gets sidelined. So the mind's detective work is skewed. Instead of carefully gathering clues and weighing them, our inner detective often leaps to the first story that fits, closes the case, and moves on. And that leaves us facing the uncomfortable question. How often are we living by conclusions stitched together out of fragments, never realizing the story was incomplete to begin with? When you make a judgment about a person, a risk, a choice, it feels like a deliberate act. You imagine yourself weighing evidence, analyzing carefully. But most of the time, it's not like that at all. System 1 jumps in first, delivering an impression or an intuition, and System 2 either accepts it or, on rare occasions, corrects it. Think of it this way. When you're asked a question, your brain doesn't search the entire warehouse of knowledge. Instead, it reaches into a small active corner called associative memory, the place where ideas, feelings, and experiences are linked. Ask someone whether a stranger seems honest, and the mind instantly surfaces images, stereotypes, and memories that fit. If the person smiles warmly, if their tone is calm, System 1 whispers, trustworthy. The judgment feels complete, though it's built on a handful of cues. What's fascinating is how quickly this process happens. You don't consciously search for evidence. It's more like a spotlight sweeping across the mental stage, lighting up certain associations. Those highlighted bits feel like the whole truth, even though they're just fragments. This is why judgments often feel intuitive rather than reason, because they are. Here's the kicker. The mind is biased toward coherence. It loves neat stories. If a person is described as athletic, you'll also assume discipline, energy, maybe even social confidence. None of this is guaranteed, but the traits hang together in your mind. The judgment emerges as a package, with confidence attached, and confidence is misleading. The ease with which a story comes to mind often determines how sure you feel about it. When recall is smooth, the judgment feels solid. When it's strained, doubt creeps in. But fluency doesn't equal truth, it just equals comfort. Consider how this plays out in predictions. Imagine hearing that a student is bright, hardworking, and articulate. Instantly, you predict great academic success. You don't stop to think about randomness, personal struggles, or sheer luck. The mind rushes from description to conclusion without passing through probability. The story fits, so the prediction feels justified. This automatic machinery explains why we're often blind to our biases. We don't feel as if we're guessing. We feel as if we know. That's the trap. The smoothness of the judgment disguises the shortcuts that produced it. Of course, sometimes these snap judgments are accurate. Years of experience can train System 1 to make reliable calls, like a firefighter sensing danger before the floor collapses. But without expertise, many judgments are just stories patched together by the associative machine. The real danger is that System 2, the supposed fact-checker, usually doesn't check. It trusts System 1's fluency. Only when a red flag waves, when something feels off, or when the stakes are high, does it step in. Otherwise, it signs off on judgments that may be incomplete, biased, or flat out wrong. So here's the detective's clue for this chapter. Our judgments don't unfold from evidence outward. They snap into place, built from a handful of associations, smoothed by coherence and wrapped in confidence. And that leaves the haunting question. If most of what we know about people and situations comes from this quick, easy machinery, how often are our judgments simply illusions that feel real? Chapter 9. Answering an easier question. Picture this. Someone asks you a tough question, like how happy are you with your life right now? It's a big one. It requires reflection, weighing ups and downs, scanning years of experiences. But here's what usually happens. Your mind cheats. Instead of wrestling with the hard question, System 1 quietly substitutes an easier one. What's my mood today? Or how do I feel about my job? The answer feels immediate, and you give it as if you've answered the original question. This mental substitution is one of System 1's favorite tricks. When confronted with complexity, it doesn't admit defeat. It swaps in a simpler version. You don't notice the switch. You feel confident in your answer, though you actually responded to a different question entirely. Take voting behavior. If people are asked whether a political candidate has the leadership qualities to guide a nation, that's complicated. It involves policy, history, character. But often the mind substitutes. Do I like this person? Or do they look confident? A warm smile, a steady voice, or a familiar face becomes the basis for a judgment about leadership. The easier question hijacks the harder one. Or think about risk. If asked, how likely is a terrorist attack? Most people don't calculate probabilities. Instead, they recall the most vivid recent images from the news. If the coverage has been intense, the risk feels high. If it hasn't, it feels low. The real question, probability, is replaced with an easier one. How easily can I recall examples? This substitution isn't limited to politics or fear. It shows up in daily choices. A friend asks if you're satisfied with your relationship. Instead of analyzing the whole picture, your mind jumps to the last fight or the last romantic gesture. The answer you give is true in the moment, but it's not an answer to the actual question. The brilliance and danger of this mechanism is how smooth it feels. You never sense the bait and switch. The substituted question feels relevant enough, so you deliver your answer with conviction. And because System 2 doesn't often bother to intervene, the easier question quietly shapes major judgments. This is why opinion polls can swing so wildly. Ask about complex social policies, and people's answers are often driven less by careful thought than by immediate feelings. Do I trust the spokesperson? Did the last headline scare me? What's my mood today? The substitution disguises itself as rationality. It's efficient, yes. Substitution saves us from paralysis. Without it, life would grind to a halt. But it also means many of our decisions, even big ones, are guided by proxies we never notice. So here's the detective's clue for this chapter. When faced with hard questions, our minds often slip in an easier one and answer that instead. It feels right. It feels certain. But it's a mirage. And the lingering question becomes, if so many of our judgments are based on these silent substitutions, how often do we mistake a shadow for the thing itself? We love stories told with numbers. They feel solid, precise, objective. But here's the trap. When those numbers come from small samples, they can be wildly misleading. Our minds, though, rarely notice. We treat a handful of data points as if they represent the whole truth. That's what Kahneman calls the law of small numbers. Imagine a small town with just one hospital. One week, that hospital records a shockingly high rate of male births. People might whisper, something unusual is happening here. But if you look across a larger hospital in the same area, the numbers even out. Male and female births hover closer to 50-50. The difference isn't fate or environment or mystery. It's just chance amplified by the small sample size. But our minds resist that explanation. We want to see patterns. We treat streaks in small numbers as meaningful. It's why gamblers believe in hot hands at the roulette table. If red has come up 4 times, surely black is due. Or if someone wins repeatedly, they must have special luck. In truth, small samples naturally swing wider, creating the illusion of significance. Researchers themselves aren't immune. Many scientific studies have been built on small sample sizes, leading to bold conclusions that don't hold up under larger scrutiny. A promising new drug tested on a small group might look miraculous, only to fade when tested more broadly. Yet even experts fall into the trap because the data feels compelling in the moment. This tendency reveals a deeper flaw in System 1. It's terrible with statistics. Our minds are tuned for stories, not probabilities. A single vivid example often outweighs dry numerical evidence. If one child falls sick after eating spinach, the story sticks more than thousands of safe meals. The sample is small, but the impression is big. System 2 could step in, reminding us that variability shrinks as samples grow, that patterns smooth out with larger numbers. But laziness strikes again. Most of the time, System 2 accepts the vivid story that System 1 serves up. The result: we put too much trust in the meaning of small numbers. Consider school performance. A small rural school might boast the highest test scores in the region one year, then the lowest the next. People rush to explain it. Brilliant teachers one year, poor methods the next. In truth, small samples fluctuate. The extreme highs and lows are statistical mirages. But our craving for explanation pushes us to invent stories about them. Here's the irony. The smaller the sample, the stronger our urge to draw conclusions. We don't see randomness. We see cause. And once we've invented a cause, it's hard to shake. So the detective clue here is sobering. Numbers don't always protect us from bias. Small samples, dressed up as evidence, can mislead as much as any intuition. The danger is not just that we misread the numbers, it's that we rarely suspect we're misreading them at all. Which leaves us with the haunting question: how much of what we believe about the world is built on flimsy streaks of chance, dressed up as certainty? Chapter 11. Anchors. Imagine someone spins a wheel of fortune in front of you. The wheel is rigged. It lands only on 10 or 65. Then, right after, you're asked, what percentage of African countries are in the United Nations? You think the random number on the wheel has nothing to do with your answer. But it does. Those who saw 10 give lower guesses. Those who saw 65 give higher ones. That random number becomes an anchor, silently tugging your judgment toward it. Anchoring is one of the most powerful and sneaky biases in our mental life. When we're asked to make an estimate, we latch on to whatever number is nearby, even if it's irrelevant. And once it sticks, we adjust only slightly, rarely enough. Think of negotiating a car price. The seller names a number first high, of course. Even if you push back, the final deal usually hovers closer to that initial figure than it should. The first number isn't just a suggestion. It's a gravitational pull. Anchors don't have to be intentional. Real estate agents, for instance, know that the listing price shapes buyers' perceptions. Show someone a house listed at $500,000, and they'll notice features that justify that price. Show the same house listed at $350,000, and suddenly its flaws stand out. The anchor reshapes how we see reality itself. What makes anchoring so tricky is that it works in two ways. Sometimes we make a deliberate adjustment from a starting number, but we rarely adjust enough. Other times, the anchor works automatically, priming our associative machine. Just seeing or hearing a number makes related values feel more plausible. It's like planting a seed in your mind, one that grows roots before you even realize it's there. This is why even experts fall prey. Judges asked to hand down sentences give harsher punishments when they roll high numbers on dice beforehand. Financial analysts' forecasts are pulled toward prior estimates, even when fresh evidence suggests otherwise. Anchors set the stage, and System 1 happily plays along. And System 2, the supposed overseer, it rarely rescues us. Adjusting from anchors takes effort, and laziness keeps us from moving far enough. We feel as if we're being reasonable, but we're still tethered to that first number. Anchors also reveal something profound about the mind. We're far more suggestible than we like to admit. Numbers, words, even random cues can nudge us, shaping judgments we believe are our own. We imagine we're independent thinkers, but anchors expose the invisible strings. So here's the detective's clue. Whenever you face a number, in negotiation, in statistics, in everyday talk, it's already pulling at your mind. Anchors are silent manipulators, turning arbitrary figures into guiding stars. And the question that lingers, how many of the numbers we cling to in life, prices, targets, estimates, are not truths at all, but anchors that someone or something planted first? Imagine you're asked, are shark attacks common? Instantly, images flood your mind, news reports, scary movies. Maybe that summer when headlines screamed about beach closures. Those memories feel vivid, so the answer feels obvious. Sharks must be a serious threat. But in reality, the risk is tiny. What happened is simple. Your brain judged probability based on how easily examples came to mind. That's the availability heuristic in action. Availability is one of System 1's favorite shortcuts. Instead of calculating actual frequencies or digging into data, it asks, how easily can I recall examples? If the answer comes quickly, the event feels common. If it takes effort, the event feels rare. And just like that, your judgment of reality is skewed. Think about flying. After a plane crash makes global headlines, ticket sales plummet. People avoid flights, convinced danger has spiked. But the crash didn't actually change the underlying odds. It just made the image of disaster painfully available. The same happens with crime. A neighborhood burglary splashed across local news convinces residents that danger lurks around every corner, even if overall crime rates are steady or falling. The media plays a starring role in this. What gets coverage shapes what feels frequent. Politicians know this well. Talk endlessly about one type of risk, and the public inflates its importance. Meanwhile, quiet killers, like heart disease, get less mental space because they rarely dominate headlines. Our fears and priorities bend around what's most available, not what's most likely. Availability doesn't just shape risk perception. It shapes personal life too. Ask someone if they're happy, and they might instantly recall a recent fight or a recent compliment. That single memory steers their answer, even though life satisfaction is bigger than one moment. Ask if you're generous, and your brain calls up examples of when you gave or failed to. Those examples dictate your self-judgment, regardless of the broader truth. This heuristic can also be manipulated. Clever communicators repeat messages, making them easier to recall. Marketers flood you with ads, so their brand feels familiar and thus trustworthy. Lawyers hammer juries with stories that stick, knowing vividness trumps statistics. If you can make something easy to call to mind, you can make it feel true. Of course, availability isn't always wrong. Often, what's common really is easier to recall. But the danger lies in how it distorts reality when vividness and frequency diverge. The extraordinary feels ordinary, the rare feels common, and the quiet truth gets drowned out. So here's the detective clue. Our sense of probability, danger, even self-image isn't calculated. It's retrieved. And retrieval depends on what's most available in memory. Which leaves the unsettling question. How much of what we believe about the world is just an echo of whatever stories happen to come easily to mind? When you think about risk, you like to believe you're calculating. You imagine yourself rationally weighing odds, scanning facts, and making balanced choices. But the truth is, your feelings often lead the charge. Fear, anger, even relief. They shape your sense of risk long before logic gets a turn. This is where availability and emotion collide. The easier it is to imagine a danger, the scarier it feels. And the scarier it feels, the more likely you judge it as probable. It's a feedback loop. Ask someone about nuclear power, and many will picture meltdowns, mushroom clouds, disaster films. Those images raise fear. Fear magnifies perceived risk. And suddenly nuclear energy feels intolerably dangerous, even though statistically, coal plants kill far more people through pollution. The key point is this: what comes to mind easily doesn't just inform your judgment, it colors it with emotion. A gruesome car crash described in detail makes driving feel riskier than a statistic about thousands of accidents ever could. A story of a friend cured by a miracle treatment makes that treatment feel safer and more effective than a clinical trial report. Vivid emotion beats dry probability every time. Psychologists call this the affect heuristic. Instead of crunching numbers, you rely on feelings. If something feels good, you see it as low risk and high reward. If it feels bad, you see it as high risk and low reward. Your mind flips the math to match the mood. Consider how this shapes public policy debates. People often oppose technologies like genetically modified foods, not because of data, but because the very idea feels unnatural or risky. Meanwhile, they underestimate everyday threats, like sugary diets, because those risks feel familiar and comfortable. Emotion, not evidence, tilts the scales. This isn't just about fear. Positive emotions distort judgment too. When you're in a good mood, risks feel smaller. Sunshine makes investors more optimistic, and stock markets nudge upward. The same investment that feels reckless on a gloomy day feels smart on a bright one. Your brain is using mood as a shortcut for judgment, even when the connection is nonsense. And here's the tricky part. Once an emotion anchors a judgment, it's hard to dislodge. Fear of flying can persist for years after a single terrifying flight, even if a person knows rationally that flying is safer than driving. The emotional memory doesn't fade as quickly as the logical one. So when availability and emotion join forces, risk perception gets wildly distorted. We become obsessed with rare dangers that terrify us: shark attacks, plane crashes, terrorism, while underestimating mundane risks that quietly kill far more: high blood pressure, slipping in the shower, driving while tired. The detective's clue here is blunt. Your risk radar isn't a scientific instrument. It's a gut feeling shaped by vividness and emotion. And those feelings are easily manipulated by media, by stories, by mood. Which leaves the lingering, uneasy question: if our sense of risk is driven more by fear and feeling than by fact, how much of what we avoid or embrace is actually a misreading of danger? Picture this scenario. You're given a sketch of a man named Tom W. The description paints him as intelligent, orderly, maybe a little withdrawn. He likes detail, enjoys structure, and seems more comfortable with ideas than with people. Then you're asked, what field of study is Tom most likely in? Without hesitation, most people leap to the answer: library science, computer science, maybe engineering. The reasoning feels airtight. His traits just fit the stereotype of those fields. But here's where the trap springs. Statistically, there are far fewer librarians than, say, business majors. So even if Tom's personality matches the stereotype, it's still far more probable he belongs to a larger field. Yet System 1 ignores that. It goes with resemblance, not with base rates. This is the essence of the representativeness heuristic. When judging probability, our minds don't weigh numbers. They look for resemblance, for how much a description matches a mental template. Tom looks like a computer scientist, so we assume he is 1. The actual likelihood, the base rate, gets shoved aside. It's a powerful illusion because it feels like real reasoning. When you picture Tom, the image of a field like library science clicks neatly into place. The coherence makes you confident. But confidence here is no sign of accuracy. It's the result of the mind's love for neat categories. Psychologists tested this by giving people 2 versions of the Tom W. problem. In one version, they were asked to rank how similar Tom's description was to various professions. In another, they were asked to guess probabilities. Strikingly, the rankings and the probability judgments looked almost identical. People weren't thinking in terms of statistics at all. They were just substituting resemblance for likelihood. This substitution explains a lot of real-world misjudgments. Think about hiring decisions. A candidate seems like a leader, so they get the nod, even if their actual record is weak. Or in court, a suspect fits the profile, so jurors lean toward guilt despite shaky evidence. In both cases, resemblance outweighs the hard numbers. The Tom W. example also shows how blind we are to base rates in general. If someone tells you that 70% of applicants are engineers and 30% are lawyers, and then you read a description that sounds lawyer-like, most people still choose lawyer. System 1 jumps to resemblance, while System 2 dozes instead of correcting with probabilities. And this blindness is costly. It means we often ignore the most basic, crucial fact: how common or rare something is in the first place. Our judgments get hijacked by stereotypes, by the illusion of fit. So here's the detective clue. Resemblance seduces, base rates vanish, and probability gets distorted. The neat story about Tom W. feels more persuasive than the statistical truth. And the unsettling question it leaves us with: how many of our daily judgments about people, careers, risks are nothing more than stereotypes dressed up as probabilities? Meet Linda. She's 31, outspoken, bright, and deeply concerned with issues of social justice. She studied philosophy in college and was active in causes like discrimination and nuclear disarmament. Now, here's the puzzle. Which is more probable, that Linda is a bank teller, or that Linda is a bank teller who's also active in the feminist movement. Almost everyone picks the second option. It feels right. It matches the description. It resonates with the story we've been told, but mathematically, it's impossible. The probability of Linda being a bank teller and a feminist must always be less than or equal to the probability of her simply being a bank teller. That's basic logic. Yet our minds don't follow logic here. They follow resemblance. This is called the conjunction fallacy, one of the clearest demonstrations of how System 1 dominates judgment. The description of Linda lights up a stereotype. She doesn't sound like a plain bank teller. She sounds like an activist. So when given the choice, people leap at the option that fits the stereotype, even though it's statistically weaker. What makes this error so striking is how persistent it is. Even when people are shown the logic spelled out, they still struggle to shake the intuition. The story about Linda is just too coherent, too sticky. And this isn't limited to thought experiments. Similar fallacies play out in real life. Investors believe a specific scenario, say, oil prices will rise due to Middle East tensions, is more likely than a general one like oil prices will rise. The detailed story feels more convincing, even though it must be less probable. Policymakers, too, fall for rich, vivid forecasts while overlooking broader but simpler probabilities. What's happening is a clash between two systems. System 1 thrives on coherence. It loves stories that fit together, no matter the math. System 2 could correct the error, but it's lazy and rarely kicks in unless forced. So the illusion of fit wins out over the cold law of probability. The Linda problem also exposes a deeper truth. Less can feel like more. A bare, logical answer. Bank teller seems incomplete, boring, almost wrong. Adding detail makes it feel richer, more meaningful, more true. Yet every detail narrows the scope and lowers the probability. The more compelling the story, the less likely it actually is. That's the paradox. Coherence seduces, but logic is indifferent to story. We fall for the narrative because it's vivid, forgetting that truth doesn't care about vividness. So here's the detective clue from Linda's case. When details make a story feel more plausible, they often make it less probable. And the haunting question remains, how often are we fooled by the richness of a tale, mistaking a compelling story for a likely truth? Our minds love causes. They crave them. Give us a story with a clear chain of events, and we'll believe it, even when the numbers tell a different tale. That's the bias at the heart of this chapter. We trust causes over statistics, even when statistics are the stronger guide. Imagine you hear about a small rural school that suddenly produces exceptionally high test scores. The story writes itself. The teachers must be outstanding, or maybe the community is unusually supportive. Now imagine the same school plunges to the bottom of the rankings the next year. Again, the story flows. Perhaps staff turnover, poor leadership, declining morale. But what if both highs and lows were just statistical noise? Small samples swing more wildly than large ones. No grand cause is required. Yet our minds resist that explanation. Randomness feels unsatisfying. We hunger for a story. This tendency shows up everywhere. When crime spikes in the city, we rush to explain it with causes. A new mayor, a new policy, cultural shifts. But often, fluctuations are just that, fluctuations. When the numbers later fall, we pin the change on yet another cause. Statistics whisper regression to the mean. Our minds shout, something must have happened. It's the same with the stock market. A company's share price rises, and commentators immediately credit bold leadership or clever strategy. If it falls, they blame mistakes or scandals. Rarely do they acknowledge that much of the movement is random noise. But randomness doesn't make a good headline. Cause does. Why do we fall for this so consistently? Because System 1 thrives on stories. It links events into chains, weaving coherence out of fragments. A random fluctuation looks chaotic, uncomfortable, incomplete. Add a cause, though, and suddenly the picture feels whole. And once that story settles, confidence blooms, even if the story is flimsy. Statistics demand a slower, colder kind of reasoning. They require System 2 to step in, to accept that chance is often enough of an explanation. But System 2 is lazy, and System 1 is persuasive. Faced with numbers versus narratives, the narrative usually wins. This bias isn't harmless. It drives us to trust anecdote over data, individual stories over statistical truths. It makes us vulnerable to misinformation and superstition. Worse, it leads us to create policies or personal decisions based on dramatic cases rather than steady evidence. So the detective's clue here is sharp. When causes and statistics collide, causes almost always win in our minds. But that victory doesn't mean truth. It means comfort. We prefer a neat story to a messy probability. And the haunting question lingers. How many of the explanations we live by are just fiction stitched together to soothe our discomfort with chance? Think about sports. A rookie has a breakout game. Every shot sinks, every move dazzles. Reporters praise his talent, coaches celebrate his potential. Then, in the next game, he plays poorly. The story shifts. Maybe the pressure got to him. Maybe defenders figured him out. But what if the real explanation is simpler? Maybe he just got lucky the first time, and the second game reflects something closer to his true average. That's regression to the mean. The idea sounds technical, but the principle is simple. Extreme performances are often followed by results closer to average. Not because of curses or blessings, but because of chance. When someone performs at an extreme level, part of it is skill. Yes, but part of it is luck. And luck, by definition, won't stay extreme forever. Next time, odds are, the performance slides closer to the middle. But here's the trap. We almost never see it that way. Our minds crave causes. When someone improves after a terrible showing, we say they learned a lesson. When someone stumbles after a brilliant performance, we claim they became overconfident. We invent stories to explain what randomness alone would predict. Kahneman shares a revealing example from pilot training. Instructors notice that when they praise cadets for exceptionally smooth maneuvers, the next attempt was often worse. But when they scolded cadets for clumsy errors, the next attempt improved. They concluded that criticism works better than praise. In reality, the extremes simply regress toward the mean. Praise coincided with natural declines, criticism with natural rebounds. The instructors had confused statistics with psychology. This illusion is everywhere. Stock analysts explain swings in company performance with tales of genius or incompetence. Teachers attribute fluctuating student scores to effort, mood, or technique. Parents think they're scolding, fixed a child's behavior, when in fact, extremes were always bound to settle closer to normal. The deeper problem is how regression hides in plain sight. It doesn't announce itself. To spot it, you have to step back and notice the broader pattern. But System 1, hungry for stories, jumps to immediate explanations. System 2 could correct the error, but as always, it's lazy, and causality feels so much more satisfying than statistics. Regression to the mean isn't just an academic concept. It's a reminder that much of what we label as cause and effect may simply be luck balancing out. And when we miss that, we risk praising or blaming where no real credit or fault is due. So here's the detective clue. When an extreme is followed by moderation, don't rush to invent a story. More often than not, regression to the mean is the quiet culprit. And the haunting question that lingers. How many of our explanations for success and failure are nothing more than tailies built to hide the steady pull of chance back toward the average? Picture this. You meet a student who is eloquent, quick-witted, and loves debate. Without hesitation, you predict they'll become a star lawyer. Or maybe you read a glowing first chapter of a novel and declare, this writer will be famous. Those predictions feel natural, even obvious. But here's the trap. They're usually too extreme. Our minds inflate forecasts based on a vivid impression, and that's where intuition misleads us. System 1 loves bold predictions. It takes a sliver of evidence, a personality trait, a single performance, and stretches it into a confident forecast about the future. The mind doesn't pause to ask, how reliable is this evidence? How much luck is involved? Instead, it jumps straight from impression to outcome. That's why intuitive predictions often overshoot. They're exaggerated echoes of a first impression. Think about hiring decisions. An interviewer meets a candidate who radiates confidence and charm. Instantly, they predict high performance, even though charisma in an interview isn't always linked to job success. Or consider investors. A company has a great quarter, and suddenly forecasts skyrocket, as if one streak guarantees long-term dominance. In both cases, intuition ignores the baseline, the average rate of success, and bets on the vivid story. This is where regression to the mean intersects with prediction. Exceptional performance is often part skill, part luck. But our minds attribute it entirely to skill, so we predict the next performance will be equally dazzling. When reality inevitably drifts closer to average, it feels like disappointment when it was simply statistics playing out. So how do we tame these wild predictions? The answer isn't to kill intuition, but to discipline it. Kahneman suggests a two-step approach. First, anchor your forecast in the baseline, the general rate of success for similar cases. For example, if you're evaluating a student, start with the average performance of students like them. Then adjust based on the specific evidence you have. Not too much, not too little, just a modest nudge from the baseline. This method forces System 2 into the process. It slows down the leap from impression to prediction. Instead of saying, this student is brilliant, so they'll surely excel, you'd say, most students do about average. Given this one's traits, I'll adjust upward slightly. It feels cautious, even dull, but it's far more accurate than the dramatic swings of intuition. The real challenge is psychological. System 1 craves coherence and confidence. It loves big, neat stories. System 2's corrections feel unsatisfying by comparison. They lack flair. But in the long run, disciplined predictions beat inspired guesses. So here's the detective clue. Intuition will always whisper bold forecasts, but if you want accuracy, you need to ground those forecasts in base rates, then adjust carefully. And the lingering question, how often are our boldest predictions really just unchecked echoes of a single vivid impression? Think about the last time you read a story about a company's rise or fall. The tale probably felt clear. Bold leadership, clever strategy, or maybe reckless decisions that led to collapse. The story made sense, tied together neatly, and left you nodding along. But here's the trap. That neatness is mostly an illusion. We understand far less than we think we do. System 1 loves coherence. It grabs fragments of information and strings them into a story where everything feels inevitable. A company succeeds, so we credit its visionary CEO. Years later, the same company stumbles, and we blame arrogance or bad decisions. In both cases, the narrative feels convincing because the outcome fits. But the real world is messier, full of chance, unpredictability, and randomness that stories erase. This illusion shows up powerfully in hindsight. Once we know how events turned out, the path seems obvious. We tell ourselves the clues were there all along, that failure or success was predictable. But before the outcome, the same events looked uncertain, full of competing possibilities. Hindsight compresses that uncertainty into a single line of inevitability. Take the financial crisis of 2008. After the crash, commentators explain it with tales of greed, blind regulators, and reckless risk-taking. Those causes may be true, but before the crash, many of the same behaviors were praised as innovation and growth. The outcome reshaped the story. What seemed bold one day became reckless the next. Or think of political revolutions. Once they happen, history books paint them as unstoppable tides. But before they began, they looked anything but certain. Hindsight creates an illusion of understanding by smoothing chaos into a tidy chain of causes. Why do we fall for this? Because stories comfort us. Randomness is unsettling. We want to believe that outcomes have clear explanations, that if we pay attention, we can predict the future. The illusion of understanding feeds that desire, giving us narratives that feel true, but hide how much was unpredictable. This bias makes us overconfident. If we believe we understand the past, we assume we can predict the future. But the confidence comes from the coherence of the story, not from the reliability of the evidence. That's why experts often sound convincing while being no more accurate than chance. Their narratives are polished, but the world is far less predictable than they make it seem. So the detective clue here is unsettling. Our sense of understanding is often a trick of hindsight. We think we grasp why things happen, when really we're just smoothing over randomness with stories. And the question that hangs in the air, if so much of our understanding of the past is illusion, how much faith can we place in our predictions for the future? Picture an interviewer sizing up a candidate. Within minutes, they feel certain. This one has leadership written all over him. The handshake was firm, the answers smooth, the eye contact steady. That certainty feels like truth, but is it? Or is it just another illusion, the illusion of validity? This bias is simple but powerful. When a prediction feels coherent, when the evidence fits a tidy pattern, we believe it's accurate. The feeling of validity replaces validity itself. Take stock pickers. Many professionals confidently forecast which shares will rise or fall. Their conviction is unwavering. But when their performance is measured over time, they're often no better than chance. The illusion is sustained because their predictions feel meaningful. They look at charts, trends, and patterns that seem to tell a story. The coherence generates confidence, and confidence is mistaken for accuracy. Or think of the military psychologist Kahneman worked with early in his career. They watched candidates during group exercises and were convinced they could identify future leaders. The certainty was absolute. But when the same candidates later entered officer training, their actual performance bore little relation to the predictions. The psychologist's confidence had been real but misplaced. The illusion of validity thrives on System 1's hunger for coherence. A neat pattern, a smooth talker, a confident presentation, a rising stock feels like a signal of truth. System 2, instead of questioning, usually just rubber stamps the impression. The confidence is seductive. If it feels this right, it must be right. But here's the sting. Validity isn't about how something feels. It's about how well predictions hold up against reality. And when those predictions come from small samples, selective memories, or overinterpreted patterns, they crumble. Yet we rarely notice because the illusion is self-sustaining. When predictions fail, we invent excuses, bad luck, unusual circumstances, instead of questioning the process itself. This illusion isn't confined to interviews or investments. It seeps into medicine, education, business, even personal life. We meet someone and feel sure they'll make a good friend or partner. Sometimes we're right, but often that certainty was nothing more than a story stitched together from first impressions. What makes this so tricky is that the illusion produces genuine confidence. It's not faked. People who believe their judgments are valid really feel the certainty, and that sincerity makes them persuasive to others. Confidence spreads even when accuracy doesn't. So here's the detective's clue. The feeling of validity is no guarantee of truth. It's just the mind's love of coherence masquerading as accuracy. And the haunting question remains, how often are we mistaking the strength of our conviction for the strength of the evidence itself? Imagine two admissions officers at a university. One sits across from applicants, asking questions, watching body language, forming an impression. The other never meets the students, instead plugging grades and test scores into a formula that spits out a recommendation. Who would you trust more? Most people pick the human. Intuition feels warmer, richer, more sensitive. But study after study shows the opposite. Formulas beat intuition almost every time. This finding unsettles people because it challenges a deep belief that experience and instinct, especially from experts, are superior to cold rules. Yet evidence shows that simple statistical formulas consistently make better predictions about things like academic success, job performance, and even medical outcomes. Why? Because intuition is noisy, inconsistent, and easily swayed by irrelevant factors. Formulas are dull, but they're steady. Take parole boards. Judges listen to prisoners, weigh their words, consider the crime, and try to judge rehabilitation. Yet when researchers compare parole decisions with predictions made by simple statistical models, the models outperform the humans. The formulas had no emotions, no stories, no sympathy, just consistent use of base rates. Humans, meanwhile, were swayed by mood, fatigue, or the vividness of a prisoner's story. Or look at hiring. Employers often believe they can spot talent in interviews. They feel certain after just a handshake and a few questions. But structured formulas that assign weights to things like test results predict job success far more reliably. The interview may feel informative, but much of it is noise disguised as insight. Why, then, do people resist formulas? Because intuition feels alive. It gives the comforting illusion of depth, of seeing the real person behind the numbers. Rejecting intuition feels like rejecting human judgment itself. But the data are clear. Intuition may shine in rare cases where experts build true skill through repeated feedback, like firefighters sensing danger in a burning building. Outside those domains, formulas win. The paradox is sharp. Intuition feels richer and more convincing, but its accuracy is often lower. Formulas feel mechanical, yet their results are stronger. People dislike this truth, clinging to the belief that their instincts carry special power. But confidence in intuition isn't the same as correctness. So the detective clue here is blunt. When intuition and formulas face off, formulas usually win. The mind resists this truth because it wounds our pride, but the evidence leaves little room for doubt. And the unsettling question remains, how many critical decisions in medicine, law, business, and even our personal lives are we still handing to intuition when the quiet numbers could do better? Here's the puzzle. Sometimes intuition is dead wrong, but other times it feels almost magical. A firefighter senses the floor about to collapse and yanks his crew out just before disaster. A chess grandmaster glances at a board and instantly knows the best move. These aren't lucky guesses. They're real cases of expertise at work. So the question becomes, when can we actually trust intuition? The answer lies in the environment. Expert intuition flourishes only under specific conditions, when patterns exist in the world, and when someone has had enough practice to recognize them. Firefighting works because danger follows patterns. Smoke thickness, heat, silence in the flames. Chess works because the rules are fixed, the positions repeat, and masters have logged thousands of hours. Their brains learn to spot subtle cues automatically, long before conscious thought catches up. Contrast that with fields like stock picking or political forecasting. Here, the environment is noisy, unpredictable, and shaped by chance. There are no stable patterns to internalize. Yet experts in these areas often feel just as confident as firefighters or chess players. The difference is, their confidence doesn't signal accuracy. It's just the illusion of validity all over again. This is why we need to be skeptical. Intuition can be trustworthy, but only if it's born from a regular environment with fast, reliable feedback. Think of a nurse who instantly spots a dangerous symptom because she's seen it dozens of times. Or a musician who can hear a note out of tune in a full orchestra. These are genuine skills, honed by repeated exposure. But without those conditions, intuition becomes unreliable. A CEO might feel a new strategy will succeed, but the business world is too complex and luck-driven for such gut calls to be consistently accurate. The same goes for pundits predicting elections years ahead. Their confident insights are little more than stories wrapped in certainty. The tricky part is that both real and false intuitions feel the same. The firefighter's instinct and the stock analyst's hunch both arrive with conviction. Both feel certain. Our minds don't come with a built-in label that says reliable or illusory. That's why blind faith in intuition is so dangerous. So here's the detective clue here is this. Intuition is like a witness in a case. Sometimes it's credible, Sometimes it's not. The way to tell is by asking whether the environment provides consistent patterns and whether the person has had enough practice to truly learn them. Without both, intuition is just confidence dressed up as truth. And the haunting question remains, how often are we mistaking bold intuition for genuine expertise? Imagine you're part of a team planning a new project. Let's say, building a digital platform. The group feels energized. Everyone's tossing around ideas, drawing up timelines, predicting success. Someone asks, how long will it take? Without hesitation, the group settles on a confident estimate, maybe 2 years. The plan feels realistic, even generous. But here's the catch. Almost every project like this runs late, costs more, and delivers less than expected. Why didn't anyone mention that? Because they were stuck in the inside view. The inside view is what happens when you focus on the unique details of your own case. You think about your team's skills, your enthusiasm, your specific obstacles. You build a story about why your project will be different. And because System 1 loves coherence, that story feels convincing. But the reality is, projects like yours belong to a larger category. And if you looked at that category, the outside view, you'd see a sobering pattern. Delays, overruns, disappointments. Psychologists call this the planning fallacy. We consistently underestimate how long things will take, even when we've experienced similar overruns before. Students predict they'll finish assignments weeks ahead of deadlines. Builders promise completion dates that slide month after month. Governments approve budgets for railways or airports that balloon to double or triple the estimate. The inside view keeps us optimistic, and optimism blinds us. The outside view works differently. It asks, what usually happens in cases like this? Instead of building a story around unique details, it relies on base rates, the statistical record of similar projects. If most projects take 5 years instead of 2, chances are yours will too. If most come in over budget, so will yours. The outside view feels less exciting, but it's far more realistic. The problem is, we resist it. We like to see ourselves as special, not average. No one wants to believe their project is just another case in the statistics. The inside view flatters us with uniqueness. The outside view humbles us with sameness. And so we keep making the same forecasting mistakes, generation after generation. This bias doesn't just waste time and money, it shapes our personal lives. People underestimate how long it will take to learn a skill, write a book, save for retirement, or recover from heartbreak. The script is always the same. My case is different. But the truth is, it rarely is. So the detective clue here is sharp. To predict accurately, you must step outside your own story. Forget the seductive inside details. Look instead at the track record of cases like yours. And the unsettling question that lingers. If we're so addicted to the inside view, how many of our plans, big or small, are built more on optimism than on reality? If you ask an entrepreneur about their new venture, odds are they'll radiate optimism. Their idea will disrupt the market, attract investors, change the game. They've done the math, made the plan, convinced themselves success is practically inevitable. But here's the puzzle. Most new businesses fail. Restaurants close, startups collapse, ambitious projects fizzle. If the odds are so grim, why does anyone keep leaping in? The answer lies in overconfidence, and that overconfidence is strangely the engine that drives capitalism. System 1 loves stories of success. When someone imagines launching a company, their mind doesn't dwell on the countless failures littering the landscape. It leaps instead to examples of triumph. These vivid stories crowd out the duller, more common tales of defeat. The availability heuristic teams up with optimism, and suddenly risk looks smaller than it is. This optimism isn't harmless self-delusion. It fuels action. If every potential founder stared hard at base rates, very few would ever start. Capitalism thrives because individuals routinely underestimate the obstacles ahead. They believe they'll beat the odds. Most don't, but some do, and those successes push economies forward. Innovation depends on dreamers who ignore the statistics. But optimism also extracts a price. Investors lose money. Workers lose jobs. Overconfidence creates dynamism, but also waste. The system relies on a steady flow of both triumphs and failures, and it's the failures that quietly subsidize the rare success stories. This pattern doesn't stop with entrepreneurs. CEOs often believe they can outmaneuver competitors through bold strategies. Yet studies show that much of corporate performance can be explained by industry conditions and luck, not individual brilliance. Still, leaders attribute success to their own decisions, reinforcing the cycle of confidence. When things go wrong, they blame external shocks. When things go right, they take the credit. Investors, too, play this game. They believe they can pick winning stocks, outsmart the market. The data says otherwise. Most active managers underperform simple index funds. But confidence persists because every win feels like proof of skill, every loss like an unlucky break. So capitalism runs on a paradox. It is powered by overconfidence, by countless individuals convinced they'll succeed where most fail. That confidence keeps innovation alive, even though it leaves a trail of casualties. Without it, the economy might stagnate. With it, fortunes rise and fall in a churn of dreams and failures. The detective's clue here is sobering. The same bias that blinds individuals to risk is the very force that fuels growth. Overconfidence isn't just a flaw, it's a feature of the system. And the haunting question, if capitalism thrives on illusions of success, how much of what we call progress rests on people leaping forward, blind to the odds stacked against them? Back in the 18th century, Daniel Bernoulli, a Swiss mathematician, thought he had cracked the code of human decision-making under risk. His model, elegant and simple, suggested that people don't evaluate outcomes by raw money alone. Instead, they weigh the utility of money, the subjective value it holds for them. A poor person gains more happiness from $100 than a millionaire does, because the impact on their lives is larger. Bernoulli's formula was groundbreaking, and it became the foundation of economics for centuries. But here's the twist. Bernoulli made a critical mistake. His model assumed that when people face risky choices, they think only about their final wealth. That is, they calculate, what will my total fortune be if this gamble succeeds or fails? But humans don't think that way. We don't evaluate outcomes as part of an abstract final state. We think in terms of changes, relative to where we are right now. Gains and losses, not total wealth, drive our decisions. Take a simple example. Imagine two people each have $1,000. One gains $500. The other loses $500. According to Bernoulli, the person with $1,500 should feel about as happy as the one with $500 feels sad, since both end up with totals that differ equally from $1,000. But in real life, the sting of the $500 loss feels far sharper than the joy of the $500 gain. Losses loom larger than gains, something Bernoulli's model didn't capture. This error seems small, but its consequences ripple everywhere. Bernoulli's model led economists to believe people were consistent, rational calculators of utility. Yet experiments show we're not. Our reactions are shaped by reference points, where we stand now, where we were before, and where we expect it to be. A raise that leaves you behind your peers feels like a loss, even if your paycheck grew. A bonus smaller than last year's feels like punishment, even though it's extra money. Bernoulli's mistake also blinded economics to the psychological realities of risk. People don't just balance outcomes. They're swayed by how questions are framed. Ask someone if they'd take a medical procedure with a 90% survival rate, and most say yes. Frame the same outcome as a 10% mortality rate, and fear takes over. The numbers are identical, but the framing shifts the reference point. Kahneman and Tversky's work shattered Bernoulli's assumption by introducing prospect theory, a model built around gains and losses relative to reference points, not final states. This explained behaviors Bernoulli's system could never make sense of. Why people buy both insurance to avoid losses and lottery tickets to chase gains. Why investors hold on to losing stocks, hoping they'll rebound. Why small losses hurt more than equivalent gains delight. So the detective's clue here is sharp. Bernoulli's elegant model hit a deep flaw. By ignoring reference points and the power of losses, it painted humans as rational when we're anything but. And the unsettling question that follows, if centuries of economic thought rested on Bernoulli's error, how many of our modern beliefs about markets and behavior are still built on shaky ground? After dismantling Bernoulli's elegant but flawed model, Kahneman and Tversky didn't stop at pointing out the cracks. They built something new to explain how people actually make choices under risk. That new framework became prospect theory, a model that captured the quirks of human judgment in a way classical economics never could. At its core, prospect theory starts with a simple shift. People don't evaluate outcomes in terms of final wealth. They judge in terms of gains and losses relative to a reference point, usually their current state or their expectations. This is why the same outcome can feel wildly different depending on the frame. Gaining $1,000 feels exhilarating if you started with nothing, but disappointing if you expected $5,000. Context, not absolute numbers, drives the reaction. The second pillar is loss aversion. Losses sting about twice as much as equivalent gains bring joy. Winning $100 feels good, but losing $100 feels worse. This asymmetry explains why people cling to losing investments, why they insure against unlikely risks, and why they resist giving up possessions, even when offered fair value. The pain of loss bends our behavior in ways Bernoulli's model could never predict. Prospect theory also explains the strange ways we treat probabilities. People overweight small probabilities and underweight large ones. That's why lotteries thrive. A tiny chance of winning feels more valuable than it should. And it's why people buy insurance against rare disasters. The small risk of catastrophe looms larger than logic suggests. Meanwhile, high probabilities are often undervalued. A 95% chance doesn't feel all that different from certainty, so people may treat it as if it were guaranteed, ignoring the 5% risk that remains. The result is a distinctive pattern of decision-making. People are risk-averse when it comes to gains. They'd rather take a sure $900 than gamble for a 90% chance at $1,000. But flip the frame to losses, and suddenly they become risk-seeking. Offered a certain loss of $900 versus a 90% chance of losing $1,000. Many gamble, hoping to avoid the sure loss. The framing changes the risk appetite, even though the math is identical. This theory reshaped economics and psychology alike. It explained why investors ride losing stocks down instead of cutting losses, why negotiators fight harder to avoid concessions than to win equivalent gains, and why everyday people hold contradictions, buying lottery tickets and insurance policies at the same time. Bernoulli's rational calculator gave way to a more human portrait. So the detective's clue here is sharp. We don't value outcomes by what they are, but by how they feel relative to where we stand. Gains delight, losses torment, and probabilities bend under emotion. And the question that lingers is unsettling. If prospect theory captures our true psychology, how much of what we call rational choice is just a fragile story? Picture this. You're handed a coffee mug as a gift. It's nothing special. Plain ceramic, the kind you'd find in any store. Minutes later, someone offers to buy it from you. How much would you sell it for? Most people name a price far higher than they'd ever pay if the situation were reversed. When you own it, the mug suddenly feels more valuable. That's the endowment effect. This quirk of human psychology shows how ownership changes perception. Once something becomes mine, giving it up feels like a loss, and losses, as prospect theory showed, hurt more than gains feel good. Experiments make this crystal clear. Students randomly given mugs were asked how much they'd sell them for. Their prices were roughly double what other students were willing to pay to buy the same mugs. Ownership had inflated value, not because the mugs changed, but because the reference point did. To the sellers, parting with the mug was a loss. To the buyers, acquiring it was just a potential gain. And losses loom larger. This effect extends far beyond mugs. Homeowners routinely overprice their houses, anchored not just to market value, but to personal attachment. Investors cling to failing stocks, reluctant to sell because selling crystallizes a loss. People hesitate to trade in an old car, even when the deal makes sense, because the car feels like an extension of themselves. The endowment effect isn't about objects alone. It's about identity, memory, and loss aversion entangled. One striking example is found in legal disputes. Plaintiffs often demand far higher compensation for damages than impartial observers think is fair. The harm feels like something they own, and any settlement short of full recognition feels like a loss. Defendants, by contrast, view the same settlement as an unjust gain for the other side. Both perspectives are biased by ownership of the narrative. The endowment effect also reveals how hard it is to separate rational decision-making from emotional framing. In theory, value should be consistent. What you're willing to pay should match what you're willing to accept. In practice, the psychological weight of losing what's already yours skews the scale. It's easy to laugh at mugs and houses, but the effect shapes policy and markets too. Governments offering compensation for land or resources often find negotiations stall because sellers overvalue what they're giving up. Investors mismanage portfolios because they can't bear to sell losers. So the detective clue here is clear. Ownership distorts value. The moment something becomes ours, we see it through the lens of loss, and that lens magnifies. And the haunting question that lingers, how much of what we treasure do we hold on to, not because they're truly valuable, but because giving them up would simply feel like losing a part of ourselves? Think about your last great day. Maybe you got good news, a compliment, or a small windfall. It lifted your mood, but how long did the glow last? Now think about your last bad day, a sharp criticism, a sudden bill, an argument with someone close. Chances are the sting stayed longer. That imbalance is no accident. Bad events weigh more heavily than good ones. Psychologists have shown this over and over. We are wired to react more strongly to negatives. A single insult cuts deeper than a dozen compliments soothe. A loss of $100 hurts far more than the pleasure of winning $100. In relationships, researchers found that couples need at least 5 positive interactions to counterbalance every negative one. The math of the mind isn't symmetrical. The scales are tilted toward pain. Why does this happen? Evolution offers a clue. Our ancestors needed to be hyper-alert to threats. Missing a potential gain meant less food or comfort. Missing a danger could mean death. So the human mind evolved a bias toward caution, treating bad events as more urgent and important than good ones. That ancient survival instinct still shapes us today, even in environments where the threats are rarely life or death. This negativity bias explains a lot of everyday behavior. People obsess over criticism, replaying it in their minds while praise fades quickly. Investors panic at downturns, selling stocks in fear, even though markets historically recover. News outlets focus on disasters, crimes, and scandals, knowing bad events capture attention more reliably. The same bias influences policy and law. Citizens tolerate gradual improvements quietly but erupt in outrage when services decline. Governments fear the backlash of cuts more than they celebrate the applause for gains. Leaders understand, consciously or not, that avoiding bad outcomes matters more than delivering good ones. But the weight of bad events doesn't just shape society. It shapes our private lives too. In careers, one failure can overshadow years of steady progress. In friendships, a single betrayal can destroy trust built over decades. In health, setbacks feel catastrophic, while improvements are taken for granted. And yet, this bias isn't purely destructive. It keeps us alert, pushes us to avoid mistakes, motivates us to protect what we value. But it also traps us, making us risk-averse, overly cautious, and sometimes unable to appreciate the good because the shadow of the bad looms larger. So the detective clue here is sobering. In the mental ledger, losses count double, bad events carry more weight, and negativity dominates the balance sheet of human experience. And the unsettling question lingers. If our minds give bad events such power, how much of our lives are tilted toward avoiding pain rather than chasing joy? Loss aversion tells us that people fear losses more than they value equivalent gains. But when Kahneman and Tversky dug deeper, they uncovered a more nuanced map of human behavior, something they called the fourfold pattern. It revealed that how people respond to risk depends not just on whether it's a gain or a loss. Picture a grid with 4 boxes. In each box fits a different combination: high probability gain, low probability gain, high probability loss, low probability loss. Our reactions shift depending on which box we're in, and the pattern is both strange and predictable. Start with high probability gains. Suppose you're offered a 95% chance to win $10,000 versus a sure $9,500. Most people grab the sure thing. They become risk-averse with likely gains, unwilling to risk losing certainty for the small chance at something slightly bigger. The phrase that dominates here is, "Don't tempt fate." Now flip it to high probability losses. Imagine a 95% chance of losing $10,000 versus a guaranteed loss of $9,500. Suddenly, people lean toward the gamble. They're willing to risk making things worse if it means there's a slim chance of escaping entirely. Faced with near-certain losses, risk-seeking takes over. What about low probability gains? This is the lottery zone. A tiny chance at a massive reward feels irresistible. Rationally, the odds are terrible. But because small probabilities get overweighted in our minds, the dream of winning dominates the logic of losing. It could be me, people think. Finally, low probability losses. This is the domain of insurance. The odds of your house burning down are slim, yet people pay year after year to protect against it. Why? Because the small chance of catastrophe looms larger than it should. That overweighting of rare losses drives industries, from insurance to extended warranties. Put these boxes together, and the fourfold pattern emerges: risk-averse for likely gains, risk-seeking for likely losses, drawn to gambles with unlikely gains, protective against unlikely losses. This pattern explains contradictions in everyday behavior. People buy lottery tickets and insurance policies at the same time. They take reckless risks to avoid sure losses, then refuse fair gambles when gains are likely. It's not inconsistency, it's the fourfold pattern at work. The detective clue here is this: our relationship to risk isn't a straight line. It bends, twists, and flips depending on how outcomes are framed. We're not rational calculators of probability. We're storytellers, pulled between hope and fear, certainty and chance. And the haunting question remains: if our decisions are so deeply shaped by this fourfold dance of perception, how often are we making choices that feel right but run against our own long-term best interests? Rare events hold a strange power over the mind. A 1 in 1,000 chance shouldn't matter much in rational calculations, but it does. We either give it far too much weight or dismiss it entirely. That tension is why rare events play such an outsized role in our fears, hopes, and decisions. Think of buying a lottery ticket. The odds of winning are vanishingly small, but the possibility of becoming rich is so vivid that it eclipses the mathematics. The image of holding a winning ticket, the fantasy of sudden wealth, those thoughts come alive so easily that they dominate reason. The flip side happens with risks. Consider terrorism. The chance of being caught in an attack is extraordinarily low compared to everyday dangers like car accidents or heart disease. Yet the imagery of explosions, collapsing buildings, and grieving families is so powerful that it shapes national policies and personal choices. People avoid flying. Politicians spend billions on security, all because rare dangers feel bigger than they are. What drives this distortion is the mind's reliance on vividness and emotion. If an event is easy to imagine, especially if it stirs fear or excitement, System 1 magnifies its importance. Probability becomes less about numbers and more about mental pictures. This is why news coverage skews perceptions. A rare plane crash on television feels more threatening than the steady toll of traffic deaths, even though the latter is far more common. But the bias doesn't always tilt toward overweighting. Sometimes rare events are ignored altogether. People fail to buy insurance for natural disasters in areas where none have happened in recent memory, only to panic buy after a catastrophe strikes nearby. It's not the objective probability that matters. It's whether the event feels close, imaginable, and available in memory. This erratic treatment of rare events explains contradictions in behavior. People buy lottery tickets, overweighting rare gains, while also refusing to buy adequate insurance, underweighting rare losses. They fear shark attacks at the beach, but drive recklessly on the way there. The mind doesn't run a steady calculation. It runs on stories and images. And because rare events are, by definition, uncommon, we don't get enough experience to correct our biases. The lessons we draw from one-off events tend to be extreme. Never fly again. Always buy a ticket. And they stick because there's little feedback to counter them. So the detective clue here is this. Our perception of rare events isn't guided by statistics, but by imagination. When a rare event is vivid, we overweight it. When it's abstract, we ignore it. Either way, our decisions drift away from reality. And the unsettling question lingers. If rare events command such power over our minds, how much of our fear, hope, and policy is being ruled by possibilities that are unlikely to ever happen? When faced with risk, most of us treat each decision in isolation. Should I buy this extended warranty? Should I gamble on this investment? Should I drive in this storm? We think moment to moment, case by case. And that narrow focus leads us into mistakes. The better way, though harder for our minds, is to think in terms of policies. Imagine you're offered a bet. 50% chance to lose $500, 50% chance to win $550. Many people reject it. The pain of the possible loss looms larger than the pleasure of the possible gain. But what if you were offered the same bet 100 times? Suddenly, the risk makes sense. Over the long run, the expected gain outweighs the loss. The difference is perspective. Single bet versus repeated policy. This distinction matters in everyday life. Insurance, for example, often exploits our narrow view. You buy protection against a small loss, a broken phone, a missed flight, because the single event feels painful. But if you step back and think in terms of a lifetime policy, the math changes. Paying premiums for every little risk drains more than it protects. A broad risk policy would say, self-insure against small losses, protect only against catastrophic ones. Yet moment to moment, our fear of each potential loss leads us to buy unnecessary coverage. The same applies to investments. An individual stock dip feels intolerable, so people sell in panic. But if they followed a risk policy, committing to hold a diversified portfolio for decades, those dips would be seen for what they are, noise. The problem isn't the market. It's the way we frame each fluctuation as an isolated crisis. Policies act like a compass. They prevent short-term emotions from hijacking decisions. A doctor, for instance, might adopt a rule: never prescribe antibiotics for viral infections. That way, in the heat of a patient's request, the decision isn't about this one case. It's about sticking to a policy that avoids long-term harm. Similarly, a manager might commit to promoting only based on performance data, not gut feeling. These policies shield against biases that arise in one-off judgments. But policies require system too: deliberate thought, discipline, and the willingness to resist System 1's impulses. And they demand that we see risk as part of a series, not an isolated gamble. That perspective doesn't come naturally. Our minds are tuned to the present moment, to the vivid loss in front of us, not to the long run. So the detective clue here is sharp. We go astray when we treat risks one by one. The smarter path is to adopt broad policies that guide behavior across time. And the unsettling question lingers. If most of us live without clear risk policies, how many of our decisions are being bent and broken by the heat of each moment? We like to think money is money, no matter where it comes from or where it goes. But in reality, our minds keep strange mental accounts. We track wins and losses in ways that defy logic, shaping our decisions in surprising and often costly ways. Take gambling. A person loses $100 at the roulette table. Minutes later, they double their bet, hoping to get back to even. Rationally, the past loss shouldn't matter. The odds are unchanged. But psychologically, the loss opens a mental account, and closing that account becomes urgent. Winning back the $100 feels different than simply winning $100 from scratch. It's not about money. It's about the story we're telling ourselves. This habit of keeping mental ledgers explains why investors cling to losing stocks. Selling locks in the loss, finalizing the painful entry in the mental account. Holding on, by contrast, keeps hope alive that the account might balance. Even when selling would free up money for better opportunities, the pull of that mental bookkeeping keeps people stuck. We do the same with windfalls. Imagine finding $50 on the street. You're far more likely to spend it freely, maybe on a fancy lunch, than you would if the same $50 came from your paycheck. The source of the money creates a mental account labeled extra, which loosens your grip. Economically, it's the same cash. Psychologically, it's a different bucket. Even governments fall into this trap. A sudden surge of tax revenue gets treated as a bonus, funding flashy projects, while ongoing structural needs remain underfunded. The origin of the money changes how it's used, even when the numbers on the page are identical. Our mental accounts also distort how we weigh gains and losses. People often turn down a series of small, favorable bets because they hate the idea of losing even once. But if the same bets are framed as a single bundle, suddenly they accept. The way the score is kept, round by round versus overall, shapes the willingness to play. And it's not just about money. In relationships, careers, and personal goals, we create mental accounts. One bad meeting can overshadow weeks of steady progress. One harsh comment from a partner can erase a string of kind gestures. The tally we keep isn't always fair, but it's sticky. So the detective clue here is that we don't measure outcomes on a single, rational scale. We track them in separate ledgers, each colored by context, by source, and by emotion. Those mental accounts dictate our behavior far more than we admit. And the haunting question remains, if our inner bookkeeping bends reality so easily, how many of our financial and emotional decisions are being driven not by real value, but by the arbitrary way we keep score? One of the most unsettling discoveries about human decision-making is how easily our preferences flip, depending on how choices are framed. We think our values are stable, carved in stone. But the truth is, our judgments are fragile, bending under the weight of context. Kahneman calls these moments preference reversals. Imagine being offered two bets. The first gives you a high chance of winning a small amount. The second gives you a small chance of winning a large amount. When asked to pick, many people choose the safer bet. But here's the twist. When asked how much they'd be willing to pay for each bet, the very same people often assign more value to the riskier option. Their choice and their pricing don't line up. The preference reverses depending on how the question is posed. This isn't just about bets. Consider health care. A patient is told that a procedure has a 90% survival rate. They nod, reassured. Frame the same outcome as a 10% mortality rate, and fear spikes. The numbers are identical, but the emotional pull of survival versus death reshapes the choice. Flip the frame, flip the preference. The unsettling part is that people rarely notice these reversals. Each decision feels consistent in the moment, guided by values or logic. But if you compare the choices side by side, the contradictions glare. System 1 reacts to the emotional framing, while System 2, instead of correcting, usually just rationalizes after the fact. Even professionals aren't immune. Judges, doctors, investors all fall prey to reversals. In one study, economists asked people to price lottery options in two different formats. The same individuals produced inconsistent values, sometimes ranking one option above another, then flipping when asked to assign a dollar amount. Their judgment shifted with the frame, even though the underlying math hadn't changed. Why does this happen? because our minds aren't built to evaluate probabilities and outcomes consistently. We respond to the story, the wording, the emotions stirred by each frame. A sure gain feels different than avoiding a loss, even if they're equivalent. Our so-called preferences are less like fixed rules and more like improvisations, changing with the spotlight. The implications are profound. If our choices reverse so easily, then the idea of stable, rational preferences, the foundation of classical economics, collapses. Policymakers, marketers, and negotiators already exploit this. They frame offers to steer us toward one option or another, knowing that the way a problem is presented often matters more than the problem itself. So the detective clue here is stark. Our preferences aren't steady truths, but fragile constructions, swayed by context and language. And the haunting question follows. If the ground beneath our choices shifts so easily, how much of what we call our values is just the echo of whichever frame happens to catch us at the moment? Imagine you're told about a disease expected to kill 600 people. Doctors propose 2 programs. Program A will save 200 lives for sure. Program B has a 1/3 chance of saving everyone and a 2/3 chance of saving no one. Most people choose Program A's certainty feels safe. Now flip the frame. Instead of talking about lives saved, the programs are described in terms of lives lost. Program A will mean 400 deaths for sure. Program B gives a 1/3 chance no one dies and a 2/3 chance everyone dies. Suddenly, the majority pick Program B. The math hasn't changed. The outcomes are identical. Yet the frame, saving lives versus losing lives, reverses the preference. This is the power of framing. The way choices are presented reshapes reality in the mind. People don't evaluate options purely on facts. They evaluate them through the lens of words, context, and emotion. A gain feels different from an avoided loss. A tax rebate feels better than a tax cut withheld, even if the money is the same. Frames work because of loss aversion. Describing an option as a loss activates stronger emotions than describing it as a gain. System 1 reacts instantly to those emotional cues, pushing us toward the safer sounding or less painful choice. System 2 rarely intervenes, and even when it does, the gut reaction is hard to override. This bias ripples far beyond thought experiments. In medicine, patients' choices about risky treatments swing dramatically depending on whether outcomes are described as survival rates or death rates. In marketing, 90% fat-free sounds healthier than 10% fat. In politics, a policy framed as protecting jobs gains more support than one described as preventing layoffs, even if the substance is the same. Frames don't just bend individual choices. They shape collective decisions. Governments and institutions carefully select the language of public communication, knowing that public support often hinges on framing. The numbers may stay constant, but the story wrapped around them changes the meaning. And here's the deeper truth. Reality itself is filtered through frames. We don't see the world raw. Every experience passes through mental categories that highlight some aspects and hide others. Money, risks, relationships, all are framed in ways that shape how we perceive and act. The facts of a situation rarely speak for themselves. So the detective clue here is clear. Framing is not decoration, it's substance. The way an issue is described changes the decision itself. And the haunting question lingers. If our sense of reality shifts so easily with the frame, how much of what we call rational choice is really just a reflection of the words that shaped it? Chapter 35. 2 Selves. When you think about your life, whose story are you telling? Is it the person living each moment or the one remembering later? Kahneman draws a sharp line here. We have not one self, but 2. The experiencing self and the remembering self. And their priorities don't always match. The experiencing self lives in real time. It's the you that feels the sun on your skin, tastes the bitterness of coffee, flinches at a headache. Its reality is measured second by second, and it cares about how each of those moments feels. But the remembering self is different. It's the storyteller. It looks back, selects highlights, stitches together beginnings, middles, and ends. And it's the remembering self that decides what you think your life was like. Here's the twist. The remembering self often ignores the actual balance of experiences. Instead, it follows two simple rules. First, it cares deeply about peaks, the best or worst moments. Second, it cares about endings. Everything else, all the ordinary minutes in between, fades. Take a vacation. Suppose 9 days are wonderful, but the last day is a disaster. Flight delays, food poisoning, lost luggage. The experiencing self had 8 great days. But the remembering self tells a different story. That trip ended badly. And that's the version that sticks. The last day colors the whole memory. This mismatch leads to strange choices. In experiments, people submerged their hands in painfully cold water twice. One trial ended abruptly. In the other, the same painful period was followed by an extra stretch of slightly less painful water. The second trial lasted longer and contained more total pain. But afterward, most participants said they preferred it because the ending was less harsh. The remembering self overruled the experiencing self. The same happens in medicine. Patients enduring long procedures often report them as less awful if the final minutes are gentler, even when the total pain was greater. It's not the sum of experiences that matters. It's the peak and the end. This division has profound implications. When people talk about the quality of life, they often mean the memories and stories they'll carry, not the raw experience of each moment. We sacrifice present comfort for memorable highlights, for endings that feel satisfying. The remembering self makes the choices, even though the experiencing self is the one that actually lives through them. So the detective clue here is unsettling. We live 2 lives at once, one in the moment, one in memory. And it's often the memory that rules, deciding what we cherish, regret, or repeat. And the haunting question follows. If our remembering self rewrites the story, how much of the life we think we've lived is a reconstruction, crafted by a narrator who ignored most of the moments along the way? Chapter 36. Life as a Story. Close your eyes and think about your life. Chances are, what comes to mind isn't a stream of countless ordinary moments. Instead, you remember scenes, the day you graduated, the time you fell in love, the argument that broke something, the job you landed, the trip that went wrong. Life, in memory, is not a movie reel of every frame. It's a story, highlights stitched together into a narrative your remembering self tells. This is why the length of an experience matters far less than its structure. A short vacation with a dazzling peak and a smooth ending can feel more satisfying in memory than a longer trip that drifts without climax. The remembering self wants coherence, a story arc. It favors drama, not duration. That's why the best years of your life often coincide with periods that weren't easy in the moment, raising kids, building a career, struggling through challenges. They make for a story worth telling, even if the experiencing self was often tired, stressed, or frustrated. In experiments, Kahneman found that people evaluate experiences based on their peaks and endings, not their total sum. 2 weeks of mild pleasure aren't judged as better than 1 week if the 1-week version ends more memorably. The remembering self is a storyteller, not an accountant. It doesn't tally every joy and pain. It edits. This explains why people often choose experiences that look good in memory, even if they weren't enjoyable in the moment. Someone might opt for a grueling climb up a mountain, enduring fatigue and discomfort, just for the exhilaration of reaching the summit and the story it creates afterward. The climb isn't fun as it happens, but it becomes a treasured memory. The experiencing self suffers. The remembering self wins. It also explains why we chase milestones. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, retirements. These moments serve as anchors for memory. They punctuate the story, giving shape to the narrative arc of our lives. The thousands of uneventful days fade, while the milestones remain vivid. But here's the tension. The two selves don't always want the same thing. The experiencing self wants comfort, happiness, fewer hassles. The remembering self wants meaning, drama, achievement, even if it means struggle. When we make choices, it's usually the remembering self that calls the shots. And so we willingly suffer in the moment to craft a memory worth keeping. So the detective clue here is sharp. Life is lived is not the same as life is remembered. And because it's the remembering self that makes decisions, our lives are often shaped more by the stories we want to tell. And the haunting question remains, if we are guided by a narrator more than the experiencer, are we truly living for the present, or for the story our future selves will one day tell? What does it really mean to be happy? The answer depends on which self you ask. The remembering self wants a good story. The experiencing self, though, only cares about how life feels as it unfolds, moment by moment. When researchers study well-being, they try to capture the voice of that experiencing self, the one that lives through every second, not just the one that tells the tale afterward. But measuring moment-to-moment happiness isn't easy. You can't just ask people at the end of the day, because memory reshapes experience. Instead, psychologists develop tools like the day reconstruction method, where people describe episodes of their day in detail, along with how they felt during each. The result is a snapshot of experienced well-being, the lived texture of life, stripped of the remembering self's editing. The findings are revealing. Mood swings depend heavily on context. Commuting, for instance, ranks among the most unpleasant activities. It's stressful, repetitive, and rarely redeeming. By contrast, time spent with friends consistently scores high on well-being. Even small pleasures, like listening to music or sharing a meal, matter more in lived happiness than major events we assume dominate. Money, too, shows its limits here. More income does raise experienced well-being, but only up to a point. Once basic needs are comfortably met, the curve flattens. A billionaire isn't feeling significantly happier in each moment than someone with a steady middle-class income. What matters more are relationships, health, and daily routines. A loving partner or good sleep boosts live happiness more than an extra zero in a bank account. Another finding: attention is everything. The experience in self can only live in one frame at a time. When you dwell on worries, even small ones, they hijack your well-being. When your focus shifts to pleasant activities or engaging work, happiness rises. The mind spotlight decides the tone of the moment. But here's the catch: the experiencing self is fragile. Its highs and lows vanish as soon as attention shifts. That blissful coffee in the morning disappears when you start fretting about emails. The experiencing self lives in short windows of time, easily interrupted. The remembering self, meanwhile, looms larger. This creates tension in decision-making. Do you chase a life full of pleasant daily moments, or one that will make a story worth remembering later? The experiencing self favors comfort, rhythm, connection. The remembering self favors achievement, milestones, and meaning. The balance between the two shapes what we call a good life. So the detective clue here is subtle but powerful. Happiness as lived is not happiness as remembered. And if we care about experienced well-being, we must pay attention not to the big arcs of life's story, but to the quiet texture of our days. And the haunting question remains: if our lives are judged mostly by moments that slip away unrecorded, are we paying enough attention to how it feels to live them? When people talk about happiness, they often mean something bigger than momentary pleasure. They're not just describing a good meal or a sunny afternoon. They're talking about how life as a whole feels, whether it's meaningful, satisfying, or worth living. But here's the catch: when we think about life, it's the remembering self in charge. And that self doesn't tally moments. It weaves stories. The remembering self asks, am I doing better than I was? Am I doing better than others? Does my life feel coherent, like a narrative with progress and purpose? These questions matter less to the experiencing self, which is busy living in the flow of ordinary days. But in surveys and conversations, it's the remembering self that answers. It tells us whether life feels satisfying, and it does so by comparing, judging, and interpreting, not by adding up daily moods. This explains why people in very different circumstances can report similar levels of life satisfaction. Someone working long hours at a demanding job may not feel great in the moment. The experience itself is often stressed and tired, but the remembering self frames it as meaningful because it fits a story of ambition, progress, and sacrifice. Meanwhile, someone with more leisure may enjoy happier moments. Comparison is key. Thinking about life often means measuring against standards, peers, expectations, cultural ideals. A raise feels satisfying until you learn your colleague got a bigger one. A modest home feels fine until you visit a friend's mansion. The remembering self is obsessed with relative position. And yet, meaning and purpose can outweigh these comparisons. People enduring hardship, illness, caregiving, struggle may report surprisingly high life satisfaction if they believe their suffering serves a purpose or contributes to something larger. The story matters more than the pain in the moment. But this raises a troubling dilemma. What should we optimize for? The happiness of the experiencing self or the satisfaction of the remembering self? A life rich in pleasant moments may leave a weak story behind. A life full of stress and striving may feel meaningful in retrospect. Kahneman's point is that we rarely recognize this conflict. We assume happiness is one thing, but it's really two: the living self and the remembering self, each with different criteria. Decisions we make about careers, families, and lifestyles often favor the remembering self, chasing stories of meaning. So the detective clue here is unsettling. When we think about life, we aren't measuring how it feels to live, but how it looks as a story. And those are not the same thing. And the haunting final question: if the life we remember is not the life we live, which one should we be trying to make better? The book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, is the lifelong work of Daniel Kahneman, offering profound insights into how people think and make decisions. Owning the original edition not only allows you to experience the full depth of his ideas and carefully built arguments, but it is also a direct way to support the author. By purchasing an official copy, you show respect for the value of knowledge and for Kahneman's significant contribution to science and society.